The wheel, the most amazing invention in human history. A complete and exciting journey through time for curious mind. Everything moves because of one simple idea, and that idea started with you, with humans just like you, staring at a rolling log and thinking, what if? Imagine a world without wheels. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You wake up in the morning. You want to go to school, but there are no wheels, no buses rolling down the street, no bicycles leaning against the fence, no cars humming in the driveway, no skateboard waiting for you on the porch. You look outside and see no trucks carrying groceries to the store, no trains rushing along the tracks, no airplanes rolling down the runway before they leap into the sky. How would you get to school? You would have to walk. Every single day. Now imagine that your family needs to move a heavy piece of furniture from one room to another. No dollies, no rolling carts, no wheels of any kind. You would have to drag it, grunt, sweat, strain every muscle in your body, and probably scratch up the floor in the process. Now imagine something even bigger. Imagine building a massive stone pyramid, one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world. Each stone block weighs as much as a school bus, thousands of them. Without wheels, you would have to drag every single stone across the hot desert sand, using nothing but ropes, logs, mud, and the aching muscles of thousands of workers. That was the world before the wheel. It was harder. It was slower. It was exhausting. And then something changed. Somewhere on this planet, thousands and thousands of years ago, a human being looked at the world around them and had one of the most powerful ideas in the history of civilization. They imagined a round thing that could spin, a disc, a circle, something that could roll, and the world was never ever the same again. This is the story of the wheel, where it came from, who may have invented it, how it spread across the world, and how it became the foundation of nearly everything we know today. Buckle up, which, by the way, you're only able to do because of wheels. Chapter 1. Before the wheel. The world of dragging and carrying. To really understand how amazing the wheel was, we first need to understand what life was like before it. Go back in time, way, way back, to about 100,000 years ago. Human beings existed on Earth, but they were very different from us in how they lived. They were hunter-gatherers, which means they didn't stay in one place. They moved around constantly, following animals to hunt and searching for plants and berries to eat. They didn't have houses or farms or stores. Everything they owned, they carried on their backs or dragged along the ground. If they killed a large animal, maybe a woolly mammoth or a giant bison, they had to figure out how to bring it back to their camp. There were no wagons, no carts, no sleds with wheels. They used ropes made of twisted plant fibers or animal hide, and they simply dragged the animal back. Or they cut it up on the spot and carried the pieces, one heavy load at a time. This was brutally hard work. As time went on, humans got smarter. They started to settle down. About 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, people began farming, planting seeds, growing crops, raising animals. This was a gigantic change called the Agricultural Revolution, and it meant that humans now had much bigger problems when it came to moving things. Farms produce enormous amounts of food, grain, vegetables, fruit, all of it heavy, all of it needed to be stored and moved. Early farmers built the first permanent villages, which meant they also needed to build houses, walls, temples, and storage buildings. And building things requires moving stones, timber, clay, and other materials that are terribly heavy. So how did they do it? They used a few clever tricks. The first and simplest method was just carrying. Humans are actually quite good at balancing loads on their heads. People in many parts of the world still do this today. But there's a limit to how much even the strongest person can carry on their head. A few dozen pounds, maybe. Not nearly enough for moving building materials. The second method was the sledge. A sledge is basically a flat platform, made of wood or bone, that you drag across the ground. It's like a sled without runners. By putting heavy objects on a sledge, you could drag them more easily than if you were dragging the object directly on the rough ground. The sledge reduced friction a little bit, especially if the ground was smooth or wet. but sledges still required enormous effort. Dragging heavy loads was back-breaking work. The third method, and this one is very important for our story, was the roller. Here's how rollers worked. Imagine you have a massive stone block that you need to move across the ground. You place a bunch of round logs underneath it. Then you push the stone, and as it moves forward, the logs roll beneath it, reducing the amount of friction enormously. The stone glides forward almost like magic. As the stone moves forward and logs pop out the back, workers would pick them up and carry them to the front, placing them in the path of the moving stone. It was clever, it worked, and it was one of the most important stepping stones toward the invention of the wheel. People in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, and elsewhere, used rollers to move enormous stones for their temples and monuments. Some historians believe that rollers were how the massive stones of Stonehenge in England were transported, and possibly how the giant blocks of the Egyptian pyramids were moved into place. But there was still a big problem. Rollers were inefficient. You needed a lot of them. They kept falling off to the sides. Workers had to constantly pick them up and move them to the front. It was better than dragging, but it was still very, very slow. Humanity needed something better, and someone somewhere would soon figure out exactly what that was. Chapter 2. The Moment of Genius. Who invented the wheel? Here is one of history's great mysteries. Nobody knows exactly who invented the wheel, or exactly when, or exactly where. That might seem surprising. The wheel is so important. Surely someone wrote down who invented it, right? But here's the thing. The people who first invented the wheel didn't have writing yet. They couldn't text each other or post about it on social media, obviously. But they also couldn't write it down in a book or on a piece of paper. Writing itself hadn't been invented yet when the wheel first appeared. So everything we know about the early wheel comes from archaeology, the study of ancient objects dug up from the ground, and from careful detective-like analysis of those objects. And what archaeologists have found is truly fascinating. The oldest wheels ever discovered were found in a region called Mesopotamia, which is located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now the country of Iraq. This region is often called the cradle of civilization because so many world-changing inventions were first developed there, including writing, mathematics, the first cities, and yes, the wheel. The oldest known wheel artifact was discovered in the area around the ancient city of Ur, and it dates back to around 3500 BCE. That's about 5,500 years ago. Around the same time, similar early wheels have been found in what is now Slovenia, a country in Europe, the Caucasus region between Europe and Asia, and in ancient China. This leads to a really interesting question. Did one person in one place invent the wheel and then tell everyone else? Or did different groups of people around the world independently come up with the same idea around the same time? Historians and archaeologists lean toward one of two ideas. The first idea is that the wheel was invented once, in Mesopotamia, and the idea then spread, through trade and contact between cultures, to other parts of the world. This would make sense, because Mesopotamia was a major hub of trade and communication in the ancient world. Merchants and traders traveled far and wide, and ideas traveled with them. The second idea is that the wheel was invented independently in multiple places. After all, the problem of moving heavy things was universal. Everyone faced it. And once you've seen a rolling log or a round stone rolling down a hill, the mental leap to, what if we made something specifically designed to roll, isn't impossible to make. We may never know for certain which story is true, but what we do know is that once the wheel appeared, it changed everything. Now, there's one more thing we need to understand about the early wheel, and it's something that surprises most people when they hear it. The first wheels were not used for transportation. The earliest wheels were not put on carts or wagons. They were used for something else entirely, and you'll find out what that was in the very next chapter. Chapter 3. The First Wheels. Spinning clay, not rolling carts. What was the very first use of the wheel? The potter's wheel. A potter is someone who makes objects, bowls, cups, pots, plates, vases, out of clay. Clay is a special kind of earth that, when wet, can be shaped into almost any form you can imagine. And when you heat it in a fire, it hardens into a tough, durable material that can hold water and food. Making pottery was one of the most important skills in the ancient world. Before metal pots and pans, which came much later, clay pottery was how people stored grain, carried water, cooked food, and traded goods. Every household needed pottery. Every village needed potters. But making good pottery by hand is tricky. When you shape clay with your hands alone, it's very hard to make something perfectly round and even. Your fingers might press too hard on one side and not enough on the other. The walls of your pot might be thick in some spots and thin in others. This made the pottery weaker and less useful. Then someone had a brilliant idea. What if you put the clay on a flat, round disc that could spin? If the clay is spinning evenly while you shape it, your hands will automatically create a perfectly round, even shape, because the clay is rotating past your hands at the same speed all the way around. This spinning disc was the potter's wheel, and it appears to have been invented in Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE, right around the same time as the oldest wheel artifacts discovered. The earliest potter's wheels were called slow wheels. They were simple turntables that a potter could rotate by hand or by kicking. Later, they developed the kick wheel, which had a heavy stone disc at the bottom that you could kick with your foot. The heavy disc kept spinning from its own momentum, which kept the clay rotating smoothly while the potter used both hands to shape it. The potter's wheel was revolutionary. Suddenly, potters could make more pottery, faster, and with much higher quality. Perfectly round bowls, smooth, even cups, beautiful vases with thin, graceful walls. But here's what's so interesting about this early use of the wheel. The spinning motion of the potter's wheel and the rolling motion of a wheel on a cart are actually very different ideas. In a potter's wheel, the disc spins in place. It rotates around a fixed axle. In a rolling wheel, the whole wheel moves forward as it rotates. It took hundreds of years, possibly as many as 300 years, for humans to make the mental leap from spinning disc to rolling wheel. Think about that for a moment. 300 years of using spinning wheels to make pottery. And then finally, someone looked at that spinning disc and thought, what if this thing could move? That is the incredible, creative, patient nature of human invention. Chapter 4. Wheels that Move. The Birth of the Cart. Around 3200 BCE, about 5,200 years ago, the first wheeled vehicles appeared. The earliest evidence comes again from Mesopotamia. Archaeologists have found clay tablets. Early Mesopotamian people carved writing into wet clay which then hardened, with pictures that show simple carts with wheels. There are also ancient toys, tiny clay models of animals and vehicles, some of which have wheels. But what did these first wheeled vehicles look like? They were simple, very simple. The earliest wheeled vehicle was basically a platform, a flat piece of wood, mounted on two axles. An axle is a rod that runs beneath the platform from side to side. A wheel was attached to each end of each axle. Here is an important detail. In the very first wheeled vehicles, the wheel and the axle were fixed together. They rotated as one piece. The axle would spin in a wooden frame attached to the platform. Later, inventors realized it was better to have the wheels spin freely around a fixed axle, which reduced friction and made the vehicle easier to roll. But that refinement came later. The first wheels were solid discs of wood, not spoked wheels like you see on a bicycle. Those came much later. Just solid, heavy, flat circles of wood. They were often made by taking 3 planks of wood and cutting them into a round shape, then holding them together with wooden dowels or strips of leather. They were heavy. They were not especially efficient. But they worked. And working was the point. These early wheeled carts were used primarily for one purpose, hauling heavy loads. Specifically, they were used in farming, to transport grain, hay, and other agricultural products from the fields to the storage buildings in town. They were also used to move building materials, military supplies, and trade goods. The wheel made moving heavy things so much easier that it spread rapidly. Within a few centuries of the first wheeled carts appearing in Mesopotamia, evidence of wheeled vehicles shows up in Europe, in the Indian subcontinent, and in China. The ideas spread through trade routes, the paths along which merchants traveled between distant civilizations, carrying goods and, importantly, ideas. Imagine you are a merchant in ancient times. You travel from Mesopotamia to a distant land, carrying grain or cloth or copper to trade. People in that distant land see your cart, this miraculous rolling platform, and they are astonished. They've never seen anything like it. Before long, they are making their own carts. That is how the wheels spread across the ancient world. Not through the internet, not through books, through people seeing something amazing and copying it. Chapter 5. Animals and Wheels, the team that changed everything. A cart is wonderful, but a cart full of heavy grain or stone still needs something to pull it. Early wheeled carts were pulled by humans. People would grab a rope attached to the front of the cart and heave it along. This was better than carrying the load on their backs, but it was still hard work, and there were limits to how much a person could pull. Then someone had another brilliant idea. What if an animal pulled the cart instead? Around 3,500 to 3000 BCE, roughly the same time wheeled vehicles were developing, humans were also domesticating animals. Domestication means taking a wild animal and training it over many generations to live and work alongside humans. Oxen, which are large, powerful cattle, were among the first animals to be used for pulling heavy loads. An ox is enormously strong, capable of pulling far more than any human. Harnessing an ox to a cart was a game changer. Later, horses were also domesticated. Horses were faster than oxen, though oxen were stronger for very heavy loads. Donkeys were also used, tough, sturdy, and sure-footed, especially in rocky terrain. With an animal pulling a wheeled cart, the amount of goods that could be transported increased dramatically. A single ox cart could carry hundreds of pounds of grain across many miles in a single day. Before the wheel and the domesticated draft animal, this would have required dozens of people carrying loads on their backs. Trade expanded. Villages could send food to other villages. Cities could grow larger because food could be transported from farther away. Armies could carry more supplies on campaign. Builders could transport more stone and timber. The combination of the wheel and the draft animal was like a superpower for ancient civilization. It didn't just make things easier. It made new things possible that had been completely impossible before. And yet the wheel was about to get even better. Chapter 6. The Spoke, making wheels lighter and faster. Remember how we said the earliest wheels were solid wooden discs? Those wheels had a significant problem. They were incredibly heavy. A solid wooden wheel, wide enough to support a loaded cart, could weigh as much as 100 pounds or more. When you have 4 heavy wheels on a cart, plus a heavy wooden platform, plus the load you're carrying, plus the poor animal or person trying to pull all of that, well, you can see the problem. Heavy wheels also made carts slower and more difficult to steer. They were fine for slow-moving farm carts, but if you wanted a vehicle that could move quickly, solid wheels were a serious limitation. Around 2000 BCE, about 4,000 years ago, someone invented the spoked wheel. A spoked wheel is a wheel with a rim, the outer circle, connected to a central hub, the inner circle where the axle goes, by a series of thin rods called spokes. Think of a bicycle wheel. You can see right through it, because it's mostly open space. Those thin rods radiating from the center to the rim, those are spokes. The spoked wheel was a magnificent engineering achievement. By removing the wood from the center of the wheel and replacing it with just a few spokes, wheel makers created something that was dramatically lighter, but still strong enough to do the job. A spoked wheel could be half the weight of a solid wheel, or even less, depending on how it was made. And lighter wheels meant faster vehicles. This is when the wheel became truly revolutionary for one particular purpose that changed history forever. Chapter 7. Chariots, the world's first war machines on wheels. Imagine you are a soldier in ancient times. You are on foot. You've been marching for days. You're tired. You're carrying a heavy shield and weapons. And then, over the horizon, you hear thundering hooves and the rumbling of wheels. An enemy chariot is coming at you. A chariot is a light, two-wheeled vehicle pulled by 2 horses at full gallop, carrying a driver and a warrior. It's fast, terrifyingly fast, and it seems to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. The chariot was, for roughly 2,000 years, the most fearsome weapon on the ancient battlefield. The chariot was made possible by the spoked wheel. Solid wheels were too heavy for the kind of speed and maneuverability that made chariots effective. But with light spoked wheels, a chariot could be made light enough for two horses to pull at full speed, giving it incredible mobility on a battlefield. The earliest chariots appeared among peoples of the Eurasian steppe, the vast grasslands stretching from Ukraine to China, around 2000 BCE. These early peoples, sometimes called the Proto-Indo-Europeans by historians, were skilled horse riders and brilliant innovators. They combined their expertise with horses with the technology of the spoked wheel and created the chariot. From the steppe, chariots spread rapidly. By 1700 to 1600 BCE, chariots had reached ancient Egypt and the Near East, the region we now call the Middle East. They spread to ancient India and China. In Egypt, chariots became so important that pharaohs were depicted on them in their greatest battle carvings and paintings. The famous Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 BCE between the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses II and the Hittite Empire in modern-day Turkey, involved thousands of chariots on both sides. It was one of the largest chariot battles in history. In China, the chariot arrived around 1200 BCE and quickly became central to warfare. Ancient Chinese armies used chariots extensively, and the number of chariots a noble could field became a measure of his power and status. In ancient Mesopotamia, the war chariot transformed kingdoms into empires. The Assyrians, fierce warriors from the region of modern-day northern Iraq, became famous for their powerful armies, which included squadrons of chariots that they used to conquer vast territories. But the chariot wasn't just a weapon. It was also a symbol of power and prestige. Kings and generals rode in chariots during parades and processions. Being carried on a chariot above the crowd was a way of showing that you were special, elevated, important. The wheel through the chariot had become not just a tool, but a symbol of power. Chapter 8. Roads, the wheel's best friend. A wheel is great, but a wheel on a bumpy, muddy, rutted, rocky dirt path is not nearly as great as it could be. Wheels work best on smooth, flat surfaces. As wheeled vehicles became more common and more important, people began to realize that they needed to improve the surfaces that wheels traveled on. This is how the road was invented. The earliest paved roads date back to around 4000 BCE, incredibly, even slightly before the first wheeled vehicles in ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt. These early roads were made of stone or packed earth, and they were initially created to make it easier to move heavy building materials for temples and monuments. But as wheeled carts became common, road building took on new importance. One of the greatest road-building civilizations in history was ancient Rome. The Romans didn't just build roads, they built a network of roads so extensive and so well-engineered that many of them are still in use today, nearly 2,000 years later. At its peak, the Roman road system stretched for over 250,000 miles, 400,000 kilometers, across the Roman Empire, connecting Britain in the northwest to Egypt in the southeast, and from Portugal in the west to Mesopotamia in the east. The Romans built roads that crossed mountains, bridged rivers, and cut through forests. They built roads so straight that you could look down one and see for miles. The Roman roads were engineering marvels. They were built in layers, a foundation of large stones, then smaller stones, then gravel, then a smooth paved surface, a flat stone set tightly together. They were slightly curved in the middle, called cambered, so that rainwater would run off to the sides into ditches, keeping the road surface dry. The famous saying, "all roads lead to Rome," came from the fact that the entire Roman road network radiated outward from the capital city like the spokes of a wheel. There's that shape again. Roman roads transformed the empire. Armies could march quickly to any corner of the empire to defend against attack. Merchants could transport goods efficiently. Messages and news could travel fast. The emperor's orders could reach distant provinces in days rather than weeks. Roads and wheels, together, were the infrastructure of civilization, the bones and blood vessels of ancient societies. And that relationship between good roads and wheels hasn't changed. To this day, one of the most important things a government does is build and maintain roads. The principle is exactly the same as it was in ancient Rome. Good roads make wheels more useful, and useful wheels make societies stronger. Chapter 9. Spreading around the world. How the wheel traveled. Here is one of the most fascinating puzzles in the history of the wheel. In some parts of the world, people managed to build extraordinary civilizations without the wheel. The most famous example is the ancient Americas. the continents of North America, South America, and Central America. The great civilizations of the Americas, the Aztec in Mexico, the Maya in Central America, the Inca in South America, never developed the wheel for transportation. This is astonishing when you consider what these civilizations accomplished. The Inca built thousands of miles of roads through the Andes Mountains, some of the most rugged terrain on Earth, without wheeled vehicles. Instead, they used llamas as pack animals and a massive corps of human runners to carry goods and messages. The Aztecs built one of the greatest cities in the world, Tenochtitlan, in modern-day Mexico City, without carts or wagons. The Maya are particularly interesting because archaeologists have actually found small clay toys with wheels, little animal figures that roll on wheeled axles. So the Maya knew that wheels could roll, yet they never applied this principle to transportation. Why? Nobody knows for certain. Some historians think it was because the Americas had very few large draft animals suitable for pulling wheeled vehicles. Horses had gone extinct in the Americas thousands of years earlier and weren't reintroduced until Europeans arrived. Others think it was simply because their rope and porter system worked well enough in the terrain they lived in. In Africa, the wheel also spread unevenly. In ancient Egypt and North Africa, where contact with the Middle East was close, wheeled vehicles arrived relatively early. But in sub-Saharan Africa, the vast continent south of the Sahara Desert, wheeled vehicles didn't become common until much later, partly because dense forests and the absence of suitable draft animals made wheeled transport less practical than other methods. In Australia, the indigenous peoples, who had lived on that continent for at least 65,000 years, never developed the wheel independently. Their sophisticated knowledge of the land, their complex social systems, and their extraordinary survival skills were adapted perfectly to their environment, which didn't require wheeled transport. In Asia, however, the wheel spread widely and rapidly. From its origins in Mesopotamia, wheeled technology traveled east through Persia, modern Iran, India, and eventually China, where it became deeply embedded in culture and technology. The story of the wheel's spread around the world is really a story about connection, about how ideas travel when people trade with each other, fight with each other, and learn from each other. Where connections existed, the wheels spread. Where isolation kept peoples apart, it often didn't. Chapter 10. The Iron Age. Stronger wheels for a stronger world. For thousands of years, wheels were made almost entirely of wood. Wood is a wonderful material. It's relatively light, strong, flexible, and easy to work with the tools that ancient craftspeople had. But wood has limitations. It wears down, it cracks, it warps in wet weather. Around 1200 BCE, something happened that would change the wheel and the entire ancient world forever. The Iron Age began. Before the Iron Age came the Bronze Age, a period when people made tools and weapons from bronze, an alloy mixture of copper and tin. Bronze was stronger than stone and easier to shape, but copper and tin weren't always easy to find. Iron was different. Iron is one of the most common elements on Earth, found in rocks almost everywhere. The problem was that iron is much harder to work with than bronze. You need very high temperatures to melt it and special techniques to shape it properly. When ancient smiths, people who work with metals, figured out how to smelt iron, melt it out of rock, and forge it, pound it into shape while hot, they discovered that iron was much stronger and harder than bronze. Iron tools cut better. Iron weapons were more powerful. And iron wheels, or wheels with iron parts, lasted much longer than wooden wheels. The most important iron innovation for wheels was the iron tire. A tire in this context is not the rubber air-filled tire you see on a car. It's a band of iron hammered into a hoop and fitted around the outside rim of a wooden wheel. The iron tire protected the wooden rim from wearing down on rough roads, and it also held the wooden parts of the wheel together more tightly. Making an iron tire was a clever process. The blacksmith, a smith who works with iron, would forge a strip of iron and shape it into a ring slightly smaller than the wooden wheel. Then they would heat the ring until it expanded from the heat. They would quickly fit the hot ring over the wheel and then cool it rapidly with water. As the iron cooled, it shrank, gripping the wooden wheel so tightly that it would never come loose. The result was an incredibly strong, durable wheel. Iron-tired wheels allowed carts and wagons to travel much farther without breaking down. They allowed heavier loads to be carried, and they allowed wheeled vehicles to travel on rougher terrain without the wheels shattering. The iron tire is one of those innovations that might seem small, but had enormous consequences. With stronger wheels, trade expanded. With better trade, civilizations became wealthier. With greater wealth, civilizations could build more, learn more, and grow more. Chapter 11. Gears. The wheel gets even smarter. A wheel doesn't have to roll on the ground to be useful. One of the most important developments in the history of the wheel was the invention of the gear. A wheel with teeth around its rim. When two gears mesh together, their teeth interlock. Spinning one gear causes the other to spin. If the two gears are different sizes, the smaller one spins faster, while the larger one spins slower, or vice versa. By combining gears of different sizes, you can control exactly how fast or slow something spins, and how much force it delivers. Gears were known in ancient Greece and China, with early examples dating to around 300 BCE. The ancient Greeks were particularly brilliant engineers, and they used gears in a variety of mechanical devices. The most famous example of ancient Greek engineering involving gears is the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901. This device, made around 100 BCE, is sometimes called the world's first computer, not because it used electricity or code, but because it used an incredibly complex arrangement of over 30 bronze gears to calculate and predict astronomical events, including the positions of the sun and moon, lunar and solar eclipses, and the timing of the ancient Olympic Games. When archaeologists first discovered it, they couldn't believe such a complex mechanical device had been made over 2,000 years ago. Even today, scientists are still studying it and discovering new details about how it worked. But gears didn't just make clever astronomical devices. They made windmills work. They made watermills work, mills that used the power of flowing water to grind grain into flour. They made clocks tick. They made the printing press. Every complex machine in history, from ancient watermills to medieval church clocks to modern car transmissions, relies on gears. And gears are just wheels, clever, toothed, interactive wheels. The wheel, it turned out, wasn't just for rolling. It was a fundamental shape, a fundamental principle that could be applied to almost any mechanical problem. Chapter 12. The Middle Ages. Wheels at Work. The period of history between about 500 CE and 1500 CE is called the Middle Ages, sometimes called the medieval period. During this time in Europe, much of the grand technology of the ancient Roman world was lost or forgotten. Roads crumbled, cities shrank, trade routes became more dangerous, but the wheel kept working. In the Middle Ages, the wheel showed up in some fascinating and important new places. The water wheel was one of the most powerful machines of the medieval world. A water wheel is a large wooden wheel with paddles or blades around its rim. When placed in a stream or river, the flowing water pushes against the paddles, making the wheels spin. The spinning wheel is then connected, through gears and axles, to machinery inside a mill building. Water wheels powered grain mills, where grain was ground into flour to make bread. They powered sawmills, where logs were cut into planks of wood. They powered hammers in metalworking forges, where iron was pounded into tools and weapons. They powered bellows, large air pumps, that kept forge fires burning hot. Before the water wheel, all of this work had to be done by human hands or animal muscles. The water wheel harnessed the power of nature, the endless free energy of flowing water, and used it to do work. It was, in a very real sense, one of the first non-animal power sources that humans ever used. The windmill was a cousin of the water wheel, but instead of water, it used wind. Windmills appeared in Persia, modern Iran, around 500 to 900 CE, and spread to Europe by the 1100s. They also used rotating blades, connected through gears to grinding stones and other machinery. In the flat, windy lands of the Netherlands, in northwestern Europe, windmills were used not just to grind grain, but to pump water, draining flooded land to make it suitable for farming. The Netherlands actually reclaimed huge areas of land from the sea using windmill-powered water pumps, creating new farmland where there had been only ocean. Wheels were also central to another great medieval invention, the spinning wheel. Wait, didn't we say that the potter's wheel was the first use of spinning? Yes, but the textile spinning wheel is different. It was used to spin raw wool or cotton fibers into thread and yarn, which could then be woven into cloth. Before the spinning wheel, thread had to be spun by hand using a stick called a spindle, a slow, labor-intensive process. The spinning wheel, which appeared in India around the 500s to 700 CE and spread to Europe by the 1200s, dramatically sped up thread production. More thread meant more cloth. More cloth meant warmer clothes, better sails for ships, and finer goods to trade. The spinning wheel even inspired one of the pivotal moments of Indian history. The great leader, Mahatma Gandhi, adopted the spinning wheel as a symbol of Indian independence in the 20th century, because it represented self-reliance and the ability of ordinary people to clothe themselves without depending on British cloth manufacturers. A wheel, a symbol of freedom. Chapter 13. Leonardo's Dreams, the Renaissance and the Wheel. In the 1400s and 1500s, Europe experienced an explosion of art, science, and invention called the Renaissance, a French word that means rebirth. Brilliant thinkers were reinventing almost every field of human knowledge, from painting and sculpture to mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. One of the greatest minds of the Renaissance, and perhaps one of the greatest minds in all of history, was Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was born in Italy in 1452. He was a painter. He created the famous Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he was also an engineer, an inventor, an anatomist, a musician, a botanist, and a scientist. He was, quite simply, one of the most curious human beings who ever lived. Leonardo filled notebook after notebook with drawings and ideas, and among his thousands of sketches and designs, wheels appear again and again. Leonardo designed improved carts and wagons. He sketched ideas for ball bearings, small metal balls placed inside a wheel's axle housing to reduce friction. Ball bearings are found inside the wheels of every bicycle, car, and airplane today. He designed gear systems of remarkable cleverness. He even sketched what looks, remarkably, like an early version of a tank, an armored vehicle that moved on wheels. Most of Leonardo's inventions were never built in his lifetime. The technology and materials of the 1400s weren't quite good enough to realize many of his designs. But centuries later, when engineers and inventors went back and studied his notebooks, they found idea after idea that they were able to build and use. Leonardo didn't just dream of wheels, he dreamed of what wheels could become. Chapter 14. The Industrial Revolution. The wheel changes the world again. In the 1700s and 1800s, something happened that changed the world more dramatically than anything since the invention of farming. The Industrial Revolution. For thousands of years, most work was done by human muscles, animal muscles, wind, and water. The Industrial Revolution introduced the steam engine, a machine that burned coal to produce steam, which then drove pistons, which turned wheels. And with that, the age of machines truly began. Steam engines were first developed in Britain in the early 1700s by inventors like Thomas Newcomen and, most famously, James Watt. James Watt improved the steam engine in the 1760s and 70s, making it efficient enough to power factories and vehicles. Steam engines turned wheels, lots of them. In factories, steam engines drove spinning machines that made thread, and looming machines that made cloth, and hammering machines that worked metal, and sawing machines that cut wood. The speed of production exploded. In a single year, a factory powered by steam could produce more cloth than an entire medieval village had produced in a decade. But the most dramatic use of the steam engine with wheels was the locomotive, the steam-powered train. In 1804, a British engineer named Richard Trevithick built the first steam-powered locomotive, a vehicle that ran on iron rails using the power of steam. It was clunky, it was heavy, it was slow, but it worked. By 1825, the first public steam railway in the world opened in England, running between the towns of Stockton and Darlington. In 1830, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway opened, offering the first regular passenger service. People were amazed. They had never travelled faster than a horse could run, and suddenly, here was a machine that could carry them at 30 miles per hour, 50 kilometers per hour, without getting tired. Within decades, railways spread across Britain, then across Europe. then across North America, then across the world. The locomotive's wheels, massive iron wheels gripping iron rails, compressed days of travel into hours. What took a horse-drawn coach 4 days could be done by train in 8 hours. Goods that had cost a fortune to transport suddenly became cheap to ship. Cities grew, industries expanded. The wheel, in the form of the locomotive, shrank the world. Chapter 15. The Rubber Tire. Making Wheels Comfortable. There was one problem with early wheeled vehicles, from ancient wooden carts all the way to the first trains and early automobiles. They were brutally rough to ride in. Wood on stone, iron on iron, wooden wheels on cobblestone roads. Every bump, every pebble, every crack in the road transmitted directly up through the vehicle and into the poor passengers, rattling their bones and jostling them endlessly. The solution came in the form of rubber. Rubber comes from a tree, the rubber tree, native to South America. When you cut into the bark, a milky white liquid called latex flows out. Latex can be processed and hardened into a flexible, springy material that we call rubber. Indigenous peoples of the Americas had used rubber for centuries to make waterproof coatings, rubber balls, important in many Mesoamerican sports and rituals, and other objects. When European explorers brought rubber back to Europe, scientists began studying its remarkable properties. In 1839, an American inventor named Charles Goodyear, yes, that's where the tire company gets its name, discovered a process called vulcanization. By heating rubber with sulfur, he could make it much stronger, less sticky in heat, and less brittle in cold. Vulcanized rubber was durable and useful in a way that natural rubber was not. In 1845, a Scottish engineer named Robert William Thomson patented the first pneumatic tire, a tire filled with air. Air, it turns out, is an excellent shock absorber. A tire filled with compressed air cushions the wheel against bumps and uneven surfaces, making the ride dramatically smoother. Thomson's idea was ahead of its time and wasn't commercially successful immediately. But in 1888, another Scottish engineer named John Boyd Dunlop reinvented the pneumatic tire for bicycles, his son's tricycle, to be specific. He was trying to make it more comfortable for his little boy to ride. Dunlop's pneumatic bicycle tires were a sensation, and soon every bicycle had them.
Chapter 16. The Automobile. The Wheel's Greatest Adventure. On January 29, 1886, a German engineer named Carl Benz filed a patent for what he called a vehicle with gas engine propulsion. It had 3 wheels, a small gasoline engine, and could travel at about 10 miles per hour, 16 kilometers per hour. It was the world's first true automobile. Carl Benz's wife, Bertha Benz, played a fascinating role in making the automobile famous. In 1888, without telling her husband, Bertha loaded their 2 teenage sons into the automobile and drove it 66 miles, 106 kilometers, from their home in Mannheim to the town of Pforzheim, the longest automobile journey ever taken at that point. Along the way, she had to push the car uphill, unclog fuel lines with her hairpin, and fix a brake problem using her garter. She also bought fuel at a pharmacy, the world's first gas station stop. Bertha's adventure proved that the automobile was practical. She sent a telegram to her husband from Pforzheim, and soon the automobile was the talk of Germany. In America, Henry Ford took the automobile and did something revolutionary with it. He made it affordable for ordinary people. In 1908, Ford introduced the Model T, a simple, reliable, affordable automobile. But what really changed everything was what he did in 1913. He introduced the moving assembly line. Instead of having workers build a car in one place, the car would move along a conveyor belt, another kind of wheel mechanism, with each worker performing just one specific task as the car passed by. This dramatically sped up production and slashed the cost of each car. By 1927, Ford had produced over 15 million Model T automobiles. The car was no longer a toy for the rich, it was a machine for everyone. The automobile transformed the world in ways that are almost too big to describe. Cities expanded as people could live farther from where they worked. Suburbs were born, highways were built, gas stations appeared everywhere, shopping malls, drive-in movies, fast food restaurants. These were all inventions made possible by the automobile's mobility. The pneumatic tire, that brilliant idea of an air-cushioned rubber ring around a wheel, was central to all of this. Without comfortable, reliable tires, the automobile could never have become the everyday vehicle it is today. Chapter 17. The Bicycle. Democracy on Wheels. Before we zoom too far ahead, let's take a moment to celebrate one of the greatest wheeled inventions of all time, the bicycle. The bicycle is, in many ways, the most elegant and efficient use of the wheel ever created. It's simple, it's human-powered, it's fast, it's quiet, it produces no pollution, and it's available to almost everyone. The history of the bicycle began in the early 1800s. In 1817, a German inventor named Carl von Drais created a contraption called a Laufmaschine, German for running machine, a two-wheeled device that you propelled by pushing your feet against the ground while sitting on a padded seat. It had no pedals. People called it the dandy horse or the hobby horse, and it became a brief fashion sensation among wealthy Europeans. But it wasn't really practical. Pushing with your feet was tiring and not much faster than walking. Pedals were added to the front wheel in the 1860s, creating what was called the velocipede, or by its enemies, the bone shaker, a name that tells you exactly how comfortable it was to ride on wooden wheels over cobblestone streets. Then came the penny farthing, a bicycle with a giant front wheel, some as tall as a person, and a tiny rear wheel. The large front wheel meant that one rotation of the pedals drove you farther, making it faster. But climbing up onto a penny farthing was quite a challenge, and falling off one could be genuinely dangerous. In 1885, John Kemp Starley invented the safety bicycle, the design that all modern bicycles are based on. It had two wheels of equal size, a chain connecting the pedals to the rear wheel, allowing the rear wheel to be driven by the pedals without having to be directly connected to them, and a diamond-shaped frame that made it stable and easy to ride. Add pneumatic tires in 1888, and you had essentially the modern bicycle. The bicycle was transformative in ways that went beyond just transportation. Bicycles gave women new freedom of movement at a time when social restrictions made independent travel very difficult for women. Women on bicycles were women who could go where they wanted, when they wanted, without needing a chaperone or a horse. The feminist leader Susan B. Anthony called the bicycle the freedom machine. The bicycle also played an important role in the development of the airplane. Orville and Wilbur Wright, the brothers who made the first powered airplane flight in 1903, were bicycle mechanics and shop owners. Their careful understanding of mechanical principles, balance, and the physics of movement, gained through years of working with bicycles, was directly applied to their work on the airplane. The wheel, through the bicycle, helped give humanity flight. Chapter 18. Wheels in the Sky, Aviation and Beyond. Speaking of flight, let's talk about wheels in airplanes. A modern airplane has wheels on its landing gear. The set of wheels, typically 3 sets, one under the nose and 2 under the wings, that an airplane uses to roll along the runway when it takes off and lands. When an airplane is taking off, it needs to accelerate to a very high speed before it can lift off the ground. Without wheels, the airplane would have to sit still and launch somehow, which would require an enormous catapult-like device. Some very early planes on aircraft carriers do use something like that. The wheels allow the airplane to roll along the runway, gradually building up speed until the wings generate enough lift to carry the plane into the air. When landing, the wheels allow the plane to touch down gently and then roll to a stop. Without wheels, landing a large, heavy aircraft would be incredibly destructive. The wheels on an airplane are hidden away when the plane is in the air. They fold up into the body of the aircraft to reduce air resistance, called drag. You'll often see the wheels emerging from under the aircraft as it approaches a runway to land, a remarkable piece of engineering. But it's not just airplanes. Space exploration also depends on wheels. The Mars rovers, robotic vehicles sent to explore the surface of Mars, are essentially very sophisticated wheeled vehicles. The Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance rovers have all used wheels to travel across the Martian landscape, collecting samples and transmitting photographs back to Earth. The wheels on Mars rovers have to be very specially designed. Mars has a rocky, uneven surface with loose sand and dust. The wheels need to grip the ground without getting stuck. They're made of lightweight metal, not rubber. Rubber wouldn't survive the temperature extremes on Mars, and they're carefully designed with patterns on their rims to provide traction.
In 2019, when scientists at NASA were examining photographs from the Curiosity rover, they noticed that the rover's wheels had developed holes and cracks from the rough Martian terrain. Engineers back on Earth had to carefully plan the rover's routes to avoid the roughest rocks and protect the wheels as much as possible. Even on another planet, millions of miles from Earth, the wheel faces the same ancient challenge it always has: staying strong enough to keep rolling.
Chapter 19. Wheels everywhere, from watches to washing machines. By now you might have noticed a pattern. Wherever humans have needed to move things, generate power, measure time, or multiply force, the wheel has shown up. Let's take a quick tour of just a few of the amazing places you'll find wheels working quietly or loudly in the modern world. Inside a clock or watch. Mechanical clocks and watches, the kind without batteries, are powered by a wound spring that slowly releases energy through a series of precisely sized gears, wheels with teeth. The gears control exactly how fast the hands move around the clock face. A beautifully made mechanical watch can have dozens of tiny gears, all meshing together in perfect precision. Some of these gears are almost impossibly small, barely visible to the naked eye. Inside a car engine. The engine of a car is a marvel of wheels and rotating parts. The engine's pistons, moving up and down, connect to a crankshaft, which is a rotating shaft, a kind of wheel. The crankshaft connects to the transmission, full of gears, wheels with teeth, which connects to the drive shaft, another rotating shaft, which connects to the wheels. Every time you step on the gas pedal in a car, you're setting off a cascading sequence of rotating wheels and shafts inside the engine. Inside a bicycle's gears. Modern bicycles have multiple gears, small cogs connected by a chain. By shifting gears, you change which cog the chain runs on, which changes how hard you have to push the pedals for a given speed. Low gear makes it easier to pedal uphill. High gear lets you go fast on flat ground. It's the same principle as ancient gear mechanisms, different sized wheels giving you control over force and speed. Inside a washing machine. Inside a washing machine is a large drum that spins your clothes through water and detergent. That drum spins on an axle, turned by an electric motor through a system of pulleys and belts, which are, of course, wheels of various kinds. Inside a computer hard drive. Traditional hard drives, the kind that store data magnetically on spinning disks, have platters, flat, round disks, that spin thousands of times per minute. A tiny magnetic read-write head moves across the spinning surface to read and write data. No wheels, no stored data. On an operating room table. Hospital operating tables and hospital beds have wheels, allowing them to be moved easily through corridors. Surgeons performing complex operations can adjust the angle and height of the table using wheel-driven mechanisms. On a pizza cutter. Yes, really, that little wheel you roll across your pizza? That's a wheel. A tiny, very useful, very delicious wheel. Wheels are everywhere. Once you start looking, you can't stop seeing them. Chapter 20. The physics of the wheel. Why does it work? Now, let's take a moment to understand the science behind why the wheel is so powerful. Don't worry, we'll keep it easy and fun. The main reason the wheel works is that it reduces friction. Friction is the force that resists movement between two surfaces that are in contact. When you drag a heavy box across the floor, the bottom of the box and the floor are rubbing against each other, creating friction. Friction slows you down. It makes things harder to move. Imagine dragging a big sack of potatoes across a rough gravel path. Every bit of the sack is grinding against every piece of gravel. That's a lot of friction. Now imagine putting that sack of potatoes on a cart with wheels. The wheels touch the path at just tiny points of contact, not the whole flat bottom of a sack. And instead of grinding across the path, the wheel rotates. The contact point is always changing. A new part of the wheel is always touching the ground. This is called rolling friction, and it is dramatically less than sliding friction. Scientists and engineers describe this difference using a measurement called the coefficient of friction. Sliding friction has a much higher coefficient than rolling friction,
This means it takes far less force to roll something than to slide it. Here's a fun way to think about it. Imagine you had to move a refrigerator. If you just push it across the floor, sliding friction. It's incredibly hard. You might need several strong people to do it. But if you put the refrigerator on a dolly, a small cart with wheels, even one person can push it quite easily. Same refrigerator, same floor. The only difference is rolling versus sliding friction. That's the magic of the wheel. But the wheel does something else clever too. It multiplies force, at least when it's used with an axle of a different diameter. Think of a doorknob. A doorknob is wide, right? That width is like a large wheel. The axle connecting the doorknob to the door's latch mechanism is narrow, like a small wheel. When you turn the wide doorknob, you're applying force at a large distance from the center. That force is transmitted to the narrow axle, where it becomes a much stronger force. This is why it's easy to turn a doorknob. The wide knob gives you mechanical advantage. The wheel and axle is one of the 6 simple machines identified by scientists, the fundamental building blocks of all mechanical systems. The other 5 are the lever, the pulley, the inclined plane, ramp, the wedge, and the screw. And of those 6, the wheel and axle might just be the most versatile. Physics, it turns out, has been on the wheel's side from the very beginning. Chapter 21. The wheel in culture, language, and symbol. The wheel hasn't just shaped physical history. It's shaped the way humans think and talk and express themselves. Think about how many words and phrases in everyday language come from the wheel. Things are rolling along, meaning things are going well and moving forward. He's the big wheel, meaning someone is important and powerful. We need to reinvent the wheel, meaning we shouldn't redo work that's already been done well. The wheel of fortune, meaning luck and fate that turn like a wheel, sometimes up and sometimes down. Everything is spinning out of control, meaning things are moving too fast and becoming chaotic. Full circle, meaning something has come back to where it started, like a wheel completing a rotation. The wheel has been a symbol in religion and philosophy across many cultures. In Buddhism, one of the world's great religions, which began in ancient India, the wheel is one of the most sacred symbols. The Dharma chakra, or wheel of Dharma, represents the Buddha's teaching and the path to enlightenment. It appears on the flag of India today, in the center, as a reminder of the country's ancient heritage. In ancient Egypt, the sun was often depicted as a wheel or disk, the circular sun disk of the god Ra, rolling across the sky each day. The circular, never-ending nature of the wheel made it a perfect symbol for the sun's eternal journey. In medieval Europe, the Wheel of Fortune was a powerful symbol in philosophy and literature. The goddess Fortune was depicted spinning a great wheel, raising people to the heights of success, and then spinning them back down to failure. It was a reminder that luck is fickle. What goes up must come down, and what has fallen may rise again. The wheel symbol appears in Native American spiritual traditions, where the medicine wheel is a sacred symbol representing the cycles of life, the 4 directions, and the interconnectedness of all things. In many cultures, the circle, the shape of the wheel, represents completeness, eternity, and unity. There's no beginning and no end to a circle. It goes on forever. The wheel taught humans not just how to move heavy things, but how to think about time, luck, fate, and the nature of life itself. Chapter 22. The wheel today and tomorrow. Today, wheels are so much a part of our lives that most of us never notice them. We live surrounded by thousands of wheels. In our cars, in our bikes, in our food, in our computers, in our toys, in our factories. But the story of the wheel is far from over. New kinds of wheels are being invented and improved all the time. Electric cars like those made by Tesla and other companies use electric motors to spin their wheels. Instead of burning gasoline in a combustion engine, they draw electricity from large batteries to power electric motors at each wheel. Electric motors are much simpler than gasoline engines. They have far fewer moving parts, but they still spin wheels to make the car move. Electric cars are quieter, produce no direct exhaust pollution, and are becoming more and more common as the world seeks cleaner ways to travel. Self-driving cars, cars that can navigate roads without a human driver, use computers, sensors, and cameras to control their speed and direction. But they still use rubber tires on roads. The wheel hasn't changed much. What's changed is who or what controls it. Maglev trains, short for magnetic levitation, take a completely different approach. Instead of wheels on rails, maglev trains use powerful magnetic forces to float above the track with no contact at all. The magnetic force both lifts the train and propels it forward. With no wheel-on-rail friction to slow them down, maglev trains can travel at incredible speeds, up to 375 miles per hour, 603 kilometers per hour, in some tests. The maglev trains in Shanghai, China, are the fastest passenger trains in regular service in the world. Is this the end of wheels for transportation? Maybe not entirely. In space, engineers have been thinking about wheels that can handle extreme environments. The wheels on the Mars rover Perseverance are made of metal with a special waffle pattern for traction. Future rovers going to other planets or moons may have wheels made of new materials, designed to handle temperatures and terrains far more extreme than anything on Earth. And back on our own planet, researchers are developing new kinds of tires that never go flat, made from special materials that provide cushioning without needing to be filled with air. Some of these airless tires are already being used on military vehicles and are being tested for regular cars. The wheel keeps evolving. It has done so for 5,500 years. Chapter 23. The greatest invention. Now we come to a question that historians, scientists, and curious people have been debating for a long time. Is the wheel the greatest invention in human history? It's a hard question to answer, because greatest depends on what you value. Some people would argue for fire, which allowed humans to cook food, stay warm, and eventually smelt metal. Others would argue for language, without which humans couldn't communicate complex ideas. Others say writing, which allowed humans to record and transmit knowledge across generations. Or farming, which allowed humans to stop wandering and build permanent settlements. Or medicine, or mathematics, or the printing press, or electricity. Each of these inventions is enormous. Each of them changed everything, but the wheel has a strong claim to being among the very greatest. Here's why. First, it was foundational. The wheel didn't just solve one problem, it solved thousands of problems. Every time humans needed to move something, generate power, measure time, multiply force, or control speed, the wheel provided an answer. Second, it enabled everything else. Without the wheel, trade would have been slow and limited. Without trade, civilizations couldn't grow and share ideas. Without the sharing of ideas, science and technology would have developed far more slowly. The wheel was a multiplier. It made everything else faster, bigger, and more possible. Third, it keeps reinventing itself. From the solid wooden cart wheel, to the spoked chariot wheel, to the iron-tired wagon wheel, to the pneumatic rubber tire, to the precision-machined metal gear, the wheel has never stopped improving. Every generation adds something new to the wheel's story. And fourth, it started with one person watching one thing roll. That's the most beautiful thing about the wheel. It began with a human being, someone just like you, observing the world carefully and asking, what if? What if that rolling log could be shaped? What if that round stone could be useful? What if movement could be made easier, faster, smoother? Those questions led to one of the greatest ideas in the history of our species,